Despite the gas, the British went over the top on July 31st. As they began the walk across no man's land, a heavy rain began to fall. 10 tons of shells had already reduced the battlefield to a mass of yellow-gray mud. The rain turned it into a quagmire. The Germans on the high ground saw the attack coming. There was no shelter on the flat battlefield except the muddy craters left by the falling shells. The British faced the twin horrors of being cut down by machine guns and shrapnel in the open, or drowning in the rising water of the shell craters. By September, the British had suffered 120,000 casualties and gotten nowhere. But Haig would hear no talk of stopping. He ordered the Australians and New Zealanders to take over from the British. In the teeth of German machine guns, the Anzacs bravely gained a little ground, but at a casualty rate of over 60%. But if Haig didn't deliver Passchendaele, the smallest of his many boasts, he could lose his command.
After a 3-month offensive to save his career, Field Marshal Haig has to justify his huge casualties with at least one tangible success. He orders the commander of the Canadian Corps, Arthur Currie, to capture Passchendaele Ridge. Calculating that the ridge will cost 16,000 Canadian casualties, Currie declares that Passchendaele is not worth one drop of blood. Stubbornly, Haig insists. He orders Currie to attack, and finally Arthur Currie promises his Canadians will take Passchendaele. Only when they relieve the Australians and New Zealanders do the Canadians realize the full horror of the battle. The Anzacs had fought their way to the foot of Passchendaele Ridge, and there they had been slaughtered. 38,000 casualties. The survivors look more like ghosts than men.
Dear Mabel, the condition of the ground beggars description. Just one mass of shell holes, all full of water. The strongest and youngest men cannot navigate without falling down. The people we relieved tell me in the attack a great many of their men were drowned in shell holes for want of strength to pull themselves out when dog-tired.
A messenger arrives at Canadian headquarters and hands the commander his orders. The Canadians are to take over the stalled offensive in Flanders. The general shouts at the frightened messenger, "Passchendaele, let the Germans have it. Rot in the mud. It isn't worth a drop of blood." Lieutenant General Sir Arthur Currie is an unlikely Corps commander. A failed real estate speculator in Vancouver before the war, the pear-shaped 250-pound Currie had little military experience. But his leadership at Vimy Ridge was key to the Canadian victory, and Currie is known for common sense, respect for his men, and foul language in front of British generals.
He had something that people are usually born with, or they never develop it, and that is a sense of tactics. He had an uncanny appreciation for ground and was a natural tactician. He did not have the formal training that many British officers had, and so he wasn't afraid to think outside the normal limitations.
Currie has seen how badly the Flanders offensive is going, and he wants to protect his men from it. As the Canadians enter Ypres, they pass their commander. Arthur Currie stands for hours at the roadside in a cold rain, saluting the men he fought with at Vimy Ridge.
At Vimy Ridge 6 months before, the Canadian Corps has been considered an elite force, but the price of victory had been heavy. Many are now new recruits, replacing the dead and the maimed. Out to inspect the battlefield is Agar Adamson of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry.
Dear Mabel, it rains or blows all the time. The condition of the ground is beyond words, and of course will be much worse after the barrage. I cannot see all the men together because we are under observation. I am delighted with the spirit of the men, and if human endurance can stand it, we should be successful. But, of course, this game is the biggest of big gambles, and no one can foresee the future. But I am hopeful the dear old regiment will play up to their very best. Ever thine, Agar.
Germans are also bringing in fresh troops. The German High Command issues the order that Passchendaele must be held at all costs. The soldiers are ordered to fight to the last man.
As the company waits in reserve, we almost hope that they have realized their attacks are in vain, causing them more losses than gains, and that they will stop. I think of something Rohr said when I was crouching beside him in a crater. We were talking about our many losses, and Rohr said with a sad smile, "Yes, my friend, it will be our turn soon. We can start to get ready for the big journey home."
During the peace talks at Versailles, Haig finally let Currie in on the secret reason Passchendaele had to be taken. He explained that the offensive was designed to take the pressure off the French army. But Currie saw through Haig's story.
Haig had his own reasons. His own reasons were that he believed that there had to be some kind of British victory in 1917 in order to stop the peace movement in Britain.
In spite of what he heard, Currie believed that Passchendaele was fought for no good reason. He nodded politely and walked away. Currie went on to become the principal of McGill University in Montreal. Of all the battles he fought, Passchendaele troubled him the most. To this day, the battle remains the hallmark of senseless horror in warfare. The Last Post is still played every night in Ypres beneath the Menin Gate, in memory of the million casualties of the salient, many of them nameless, their shattered remains still lying under Flanders fields.
Of course it's tragic. The whole First World War was tragic. It's appalling. Who can't think that? But I don't think we should allow the tragedy to overshadow the tremendous will and remarkable generation that fought it and believed that they were fighting it for us.
After Harold Lewis was wounded, he was sent to a hospital in London. There, a British doctor realized he was a teenager, a boy. He refused to send him back to the front. To his dismay, Harold was discharged and shipped back to Canada. For him, the war was over.
Well, truthfully, you never thought anything about being killed. In other words, when over the top, you knew you would either be killed or you'd make it. And that's all there was to it. You didn't think about it.
Does it bother you to talk about the war?
I look at it this way. Somebody's always asking, and if we don't tell, they don't know. And that's about, in other words, it's just like everything else. Conversation makes good sense. And that's about the way I look at it.
Harold Lewis died during the editing of this film. He was 102, the last Canadian survivor of the Battle of Passchendaele.